Welcome to the Landscape Architecture 397D final presentation, Site Planning for Housing, Creating a Community. We'd like to begin by noting this studio, taught by Professor Mark Lindholt, is a continuation of our first half studio, taught by Frank Slegers. Thank you for joining us today. The studio had multiple objectives that each group sought to integrate into their final designs. We focused on learning how to analyze a project's natural factors, such as wetlands, vegetation, soils, and slopes, in order to develop a clear set of opportunities and constraints, how zoning, wetland regulations, land use restrictions, and infrastructure impact design, strategies for mitigating environmental impacts on site, strategies for larger planning connectivity to link the site into the broader community, how to design using sustainable practices, and how to develop a grading plan that fits buildings, paths, roads, and open spaces naturally into the landscape.
To aid in the design process and to explore the various approaches to solving issues associated with housing communities, we first explored a number of case studies from Baldwin Hills in California to Cherry Hill Co-housing in North Amherst. From these communities, we were able to better understand the relationship between parking, housing units, and open spaces, and how to create hierarchies of open spaces through the design placement of these elements. An important consideration for our design was the delineation between public and private spaces. Often defined successful developments where having central open spaces for the communities were key to their designs. As a studio, we explored Puffton Village, Applewood Retirement Community, Brandywine, and Amity Place in person to further explore certain design elements and how they were utilized within those communities. Each design group explored ways to design a more sustainable residential development with community open spaces that provide a clear gradient from public spaces to private gardens. We also spatially explored alternative housing densities and typologies using digital 3D models for design decision-making. The final design proposals from each team include a grading plan that manages rainwater and shapes spaces for human activity.
Located 2 hours west of Boston is UMass Amherst. 6 miles south of UMass Amherst and 5.3 miles from downtown Amherst is where our site is located. In the immediate vicinity of the site are attractions such as the Eric Carle Museum, Atkins Farm Country Market, Hampshire College, and the National Yiddish Book Center. The Atkins Corner area is also home to the Applewood Retirement Community, a planned unit residential community, as well as farms and single-family homes.
The history of the site echoes much of New England's past, when woodlands were cleared to give way to agricultural and pastoral lands. These areas were used to feed livestock in the small towns where they were located, and retain much of that land use today through agricultural preservation. In 1967, our site was purchased by Hampshire College and utilized for hay cultivation up through today. The only building on the site is a classic colonial home named the Warner House, built in 1770. This historic home is currently unoccupied and is not registered on the National Registry of Historic Places. Each design team has the choice to either remove the home or integrate it into their proposed designs. There are 40,079 people living in Amherst, including roughly 30,000 students that attend area universities. Due to these factors, Amherst has a high demand for housing during the semester. Currently, rental properties make up roughly 55% of the available units in Amherst, with the rest being occupied by the primary owners. Compared to the surrounding towns, Amherst has rental prices that are 30% higher. The main link to Amherst and Hadley is Route 116, with smaller trails around the periphery of the site and sidewalks along 116 that allow for easier access to Hampshire College and Atkins Farm on foot. Currently, there is little in the way of vehicle access to the site, with the western edge along 116 featuring one curb cut to the site and the driveway to the existing home. The eastern rooms are only accessible over an existing stone culvert.
The PVTA Route 38 connects UMass, downtown Amherst, and Hampshire College with Mount Holyoke College. The closest bus stop to our site is on the Hampshire College campus and is a roughly 20-minute bus ride from downtown. There is an additional 7-minute walk from the bus stop to the site. Additionally, the Route 39 links Hampshire College to Smith College and Northampton, and is a 20-minute bus ride that allows for access to more shopping and dining options. Our site is currently zoned as educational, with the majority of abutting properties to our site consisting of low-density residential zones to the north and east, with outlying residential zones to the south. The western border is Hampshire College, which is also in the educational zone. Much of the land in low-density zones surrounding our site are permanently protected by agricultural preservation restrictions, which means the development rights to the land were purchased by the state so that the land can only be used for agricultural purposes into the future. Additionally, there is a village center business zone towards the southwest corner of our site and south of Hampshire College where Acton's Farm is located. We propose that any developer looking at this property use the Plan Unit Residential Development Overlay, which gives flexibility in residential development.
A major consideration for all of our designs was the large, high-tension power lines that run along the eastern edge of our site. These have an easement and development is not allowed under the lines. The majority of the utilities, including electricity, water, sewer, and gas lines, run along 116 at the western edge of the site and would allow for easy access.
There are two perennial streams running across our site. One is Muddy Brook, running from south to north, and the other is Plum Brook, running from west to east. Because of the location of these two streams on site, there are riparian zones accompanied by wetland buffers. A riparian zone is defined as the interface between land and river or stream. Thus, plants along the river are called riparian vegetation. Wetlands are defined by soil, plants, water, and animal communities within the area, while wetland buffers are naturally vegetated upland area that are adjacent to a wetland or surface of water. The riparian zone provides wildlife habitat and promotes biodiversity, traps sediments, filters rainwater, and allows for easy wildlife movement. The purple area on the map shows the riparian zone of Muddy Brook, and the yellow arrow is the bridge. The dark and light blue areas on the map show the wetland buffer of Muddy Brook, and the yellow arrow is the bridge.
This is our largest space, surrounded on four sides by vegetation. And this edge right here protects this corner from the northwesterly winds. It's actually a pretty windy day, but we're not feeling much right now. Already the open space on our site was previously or currently used for hay cultivation. Look over this way, we can see that this entire space is relatively flat, so we may need to create some water systems to deal with storm water and other aspects. This is our most enclosed space with vegetation bordering each of the four sides. But as you can see over here, there's some houses right up past the borderline, which we'll have to keep into consideration when we're developing our housing to make sure everyone has privacy. This existing pathway is the only link over the river between these two large sections of our site. And as you also notice, it creates kind of a wind tunnel, which can cause some issues in the design process. This space was the most difficult out of the four to develop due to the limited amount of developable space as well as the adjacency to busy Route 116. Here lies the only two existing structures on our site, a house and its barn, built in 1770. This is a valuable amenity on our site as it can be used in different ways, and that's up to each group to decide. This section of our site is the least enclosed by vegetation, causing some issues. It makes it susceptible to cold winds coming in from this direction and also the traffic along 116. And if you look over here, the property adjacent to us is visible, so visual and physical barriers may be recommended. The majority of the vegetation on our site lies within undevelopable wetland areas, but this area here is developable. But as you can see, it's ravaged with invasives like this multiflora rose, along with staghorn sumac and oriental bittersweet, which you'll see kind of trying to kill all these trees around here. So each group has this decision what they want to do with this space, whether they want to develop it, knocking down some of the trees, or if they kind of want to fix up and maintain this vegetated area. The wetland vegetation consists primarily of red maples like this butte right here. There's also some American beeches, some ferns, and other wetland vegetation dispersed throughout.
As you can see, the steepest portion of our site is located on the northwestern corner of our site and is adjacent to Route 116. It's also the location of our high point at 220. As you move east into the site, the low point, elevation 180, is located only a measly 940 feet away from the high point. These east-facing slopes presents a challenge, but could potentially be advantageous because of the slope that they present. Our site is made up of 5 very well-drained soils made up of silty loam. We also have 4 poorly drained soils that appear always near the wetlands.
The Wetlands Protection Act provides a 100-foot buffer around all wetlands. The town of Amherst has a 25-foot no-build zone surrounding these wetlands. The remaining 75 feet can be altered with a permit from the Amherst Conservation Commission, but this is only for landform, parking lots, and certain types of roads. As a whole, local attractions such as Atkins Farm and Hampshire College, paired with the favorable open areas that would allow for ease of construction and access to the Holyoke Range, create an opportunity for a community to be established. Even though constraints such as the wetland location and high-tension power lines are located on the site, the design team sought to create communities that provide for the public and private needs of their residents while embodying the spirit of ecological protection and conservation. We developed a final assessment diagram based on all of the site inventory information. The major constraints were the Muddy Brook with its 100 and 200-foot buffers, the wetlands with their 25-foot no-build zone, and the power line easement, which precludes any construction.
Of the site's 53.3 acres, 26.1 cannot be developed based on these factors. Of the 27.2 acres of land that can be developed, 16.2 acres are pasture, 3.1 acres are forest, and 8 acres are in the wetland buffer or the 100 to 200 foot portion of the stream buffer. These are areas that potentially can have roads or parking built within them after getting a permit and order of conditions from the Amherst Conservation Commission. Opportunities are the views of the Holyoke Range and the site's close proximity to Hampshire College. We now invite you to listen to the 5 proposals for developing the site, which will respect the development constraints and take advantage of the site's opportunities.